What if the man you built a life with, the father of your child, dismissed your entire existence with 7 soul-crushing words? For Elena, a trip to the bank with her husband Richard and their 5-year-old son Leo turned into a public nightmare. In front of a stranger, Richard didn't just deny their marriage, he reduced her to a biological function. "She's not my wife," he said with chilling indifference. "Just a surrogate." That single sentence ignited a firestorm, a battle for her identity, her dignity, and her son. This is the story of how a mother's love, pushed to the brink, proved that she was anything but just a surrogate. It's the story of how that night the man who denied her lost everything. The air in the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and old money. It was a place of hushed transactions and quiet importance, the kind of establishment Richard Vance felt perfectly at home in. For Elena, it always felt like she was an actress on a set she hadn't been properly briefed for. She smoothed down the skirt of her simple but elegant navy dress, a nervous habit she'd developed over 7 years of marriage to a man born into a world of casual opulence. Their son Leo, a boisterous 5-year-old with Richard's dark hair and her bright, curious eyes, was starting to squirm. "Mommy, can I have a lollipop? Mr. Henderson has a jar." "We'll see, sweetie," Elena murmured, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. "Let's just finish up with Daddy." Richard wasn't paying attention. He was scrolling through his phone, his thumb flicking impatiently across the screen. He hadn't wanted to come. "It's just opening a trust account for Leo's education, Elena. The advisors can handle it." But Elena had insisted. She believed in doing these things as a family, in creating small, shared traditions out of life's milestones, even the boring ones. She felt the glue that held them together, a bond more essential than the Vance family fortune. Lately, she'd felt that glue beginning to lose its hold. They were finally called to a polished mahogany desk where a kind-faced, middle-aged clerk named Brenda was waiting. Her nameplate was positioned neatly beside a computer monitor. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I'm Brenda. So pleased to meet you," she said with a warm smile, her eyes crinkling. "And who is this handsome young man?" "I'm Leo," their son announced, puffing out his chest. Brenda chuckled. "Well, Leo, it's a pleasure. We're just setting up a little nest egg for you today." Richard gave a perfunctory nod, still more engaged with his phone than the human beings in front of him. Elena's smile felt brittle. She handled the initial pleasantries, her voice a soft counterpoint to the clacking of Brenda's keyboard. They went through the paperwork, a blizzard of numbers and legal jargon. Elena signed where indicated, her hand flowing in the practice script of Elena Vance. Finally, Brenda turned to a particular form. "All right, just a few final details. This is our family legacy package, which links all of your accounts and offers certain benefits. I just need to confirm the primary and secondary account holders. So Mr. Vance and Mrs. Vance," she gestured towards Elena, "as his wife and the mother of the child." Richard looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if Brenda had asked a particularly stupid question. He let out a short, dismissive sound that was not quite a laugh. "Oh," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet bank. "She's not my wife." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Elena's heart stopped. She stared at Richard, her mind refusing to process the statement. She could feel Brenda's professional smile falter, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Leo, sensing the sudden sharp shift in the emotional atmosphere, looked from his father to his mother. Brenda, ever the professional, tried to recover. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I must have misunderstood the—" Richard cut her off, waving a dismissive hand towards Elena without even looking at her. The gesture was like one you'd use to point out a piece of furniture. "She's just the surrogate." Just. The surrogate. 7 words. 7 words that vaporized 7 years of marriage, a decade of shared life, the agony of infertility, the miracle of a successful IVF transfer, and 9 months of carrying their son under her own heart. Each word was a perfectly polished stone dropped into the placid pool of her life, and the ripples were devastating. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The hushed whispers of the bank seemed to amplify into a roar in her ears. She wasn't Mrs. Vance. She wasn't a partner. She wasn't the woman he loved. She was a vessel, an incubator, a service provider, and he had just announced it to a complete stranger with the same casual air he might use to say, "She's just here to fix the air conditioning." Brenda's face was a mask of horrified pity. She looked at Elena, then at Richard, then down at the paperwork, her hands hovering uselessly over the keyboard. The space for wife's signature seemed to mock Elena from the page. "I see," Brenda stammered, her gaze fixed firmly on her monitor. Leo tugged on Elena's sleeve. "Mommy, what's a surrogate?" Elena couldn't breathe. She couldn't form a word. She looked at Richard, her eyes pleading with him to take it back, to laugh and say it was a bizarre, terrible joke. But he was already looking back down at his phone, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had said it and he meant it. He had erased her. Slowly, deliberately, Elena stood up. The movement felt heavy, as if she were wading through water. She took Leo's small hand in hers. Her own hand was ice cold. "Come on, Leo," she said, her voice a raw, shaky whisper. "We're leaving." She didn't look at Richard. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she knew she would either shatter into a million pieces or do something she would regret. She walked away from the mahogany desk, past the questioning glances of other patrons, her son trotting to keep up. "But what about my lollipop?" Leo asked, his voice full of a child's innocent confusion. "I'll buy you a whole bag, my love," Elena promised, her voice breaking on the last word. The automatic glass doors slid open and the humid city air hit her like a physical blow. She didn't stop walking until she reached their car, a sleek black Mercedes that suddenly felt like a cage. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so violently she could barely fit the key in the door. She buckled a chattering Leo into his car seat, her movements jerky and robotic. She got into the driver's seat and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. A pale, hollow-eyed stranger stared back. A few minutes later, Richard slid into the passenger seat, smelling of expensive cologne and oblivious self-importance. "What was that all about?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. "You caused a scene, Elena." The dam broke. "I caused a scene?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it scared her. "You publicly disowned me, Richard. You dismissed me as if I were nothing more than a hired womb." He actually had the audacity to scoff. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was a legal distinction. With my family's assets, everything has to be precise. You know Mother worries about these things. Calling you the surrogate is just factually accurate from a certain legal perspective." "A legal perspective," she repeated, her voice rising. "I am your wife. I am the mother of your child. I carried him. I gave birth to him. We have a marriage certificate. We have a life. Or did I imagine all of that?" "Of course you didn't imagine it," he said, finally looking at her, but his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth she once cherished. "But you know the arrangement was always unorthodox. You know my mother, the family. They see things a certain way. It was just simpler to clarify." Simpler. It was simpler to gut her in public than to stand up to his mother. Simpler to reduce her to a biological function than to call her his wife. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. Leo, sensing the storm, had fallen asleep in the back, his head lolled to one side. Elena drove on autopilot, her mind a maelstrom of memories, their wedding day. Richard's tearful joy when the IVF finally worked his hand on her swollen belly, the moment he'd first held Leo in the hospital, whispering, thank you, my love." Where was that man? Who was this cold, callous stranger sitting beside her? They arrived at their large, impeccably decorated house in a wealthy suburb, a house that now felt like a gilded cage built by his family's money, not their shared love. Richard got out of the car and went inside without a backward glance, expecting her to unbuckle Leo and follow meekly behind. But Elena didn't move. She sat in the silence of the garage, the only sound the soft ticking of the cooling engine. She looked back at her sleeping son, his face so peaceful and innocent. He deserved a mother who was respected. He deserved a father who honored his mother. He deserved more than a life built on a foundation of legal distinctions and subservience to a cruel, calculating matriarch. Richard thought his words in the bank were just a clarification, an insignificant detail. He was wrong. They were a declaration of war. And in that moment, sitting in the sterile silence of her garage, Elena knew something with absolute certainty. This was not a scene she was causing. This was the end of the play. That night, after Richard had gone to sleep in their master bedroom, assuming her silence was acceptance, Elena moved with a quiet, determined fury. She packed 3 suitcases, 1 for her, 2 for Leo. Clothes, toys, his favorite blanket, the worn copy of Goodnight Moon. She took her laptop, her personal documents, and the photo albums, the tangible proof of the life he had just denied. She drained half the funds from their joint checking account, the one she had access to, transferring it to her personal savings. At 2 a.m., she slipped into Leo's room. She gently woke him, whispering, "Hey, sleepyhead, we're going on a little adventure, just you and me." Leo, groggy and compliant, let her dress him and lead him downstairs. As she passed the closed door to the master bedroom, she paused. There was no anger left, just a vast, cold emptiness. He hadn't just lost a wife tonight. He had lost the respect, the love, and the life they had built. She buckled Leo into the car, his suitcases tucked beside him. As she pulled out of the driveway, she didn't look back. She was driving away from the house, from the Vance name, from the man who called her a surrogate. She was driving toward an uncertain future, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt like more than just Mrs. Vance. She felt like Elena, and she had her son. That was all that mattered. The battle had just begun, and Richard had no idea of the power of the woman he had just so carelessly discarded. The headlights of Elena's car cut through the pre-dawn gloom, illuminating the quiet, tree-lined street where Chloe lived. Chloe's small, charming bungalow, with its overflowing flower boxes and brightly painted door, was more than just a house. It was Elena's sanctuary. Chloe had been her best friend since college, her maid of honor, her confidant through the brutal years of fertility treatments, and the first person after Richard to hold Leo. When Elena called her from a gas station at 3 a.m., her voice a ragged whisper, Chloe hadn't hesitated. "Don't say another word. I have the spare key under the ceramic frog. The guest room is ready. Just get here." Now, as Elena carried a sleeping Leo from the car, the front door swung open. Chloe, her fiery red hair a mess, and a thick robe tied hastily around her, enveloped them both in a fierce hug. "Get him inside," Chloe murmured, her voice thick with a mixture of sleep and concern. She took one of the suitcases, and together they settled Leo into the guest room bed, tucking him in without waking him. In the cozy, cluttered kitchen, over steaming mugs of chamomile tea, the story poured out of Elena. She recounted the scene at the bank, Richard's dismissive tone, the look on the clerk's face, his pathetic justification in the car. With each word, Chloe's expression hardened from sympathy to a cold, controlled fury. "He said what?" Chloe finally managed to say, her knuckles white around her mug. "That son of a bitch. After everything, after all those injections, the procedures, the miscarriages. For him to reduce you to that, in public. He said it was a legal distinction." Elena choked out the words, tasting like ash. "For his mother. It was always for his mother, Chloe. I was never good enough for the great Eleanor Vance. Not the right pedigree, not from old money. I was just the incubator for the Vance heir." "I never trusted that woman," Chloe seethed. "She looks at people like they're insects she's deciding whether or not to squash. And Richard, I knew he was weak, but I never thought he was cruel. He let her poison him completely." Elena finally let the tears she'd been holding back fall silent hot tracks down her cheeks. "I feel so stupid. I tried so hard to be the perfect wife to fit into their world. I hosted their charity dinners, I wore the right clothes, I pretended to be fascinated by their polo matches. And for what? to be publicly humiliated and erased. No, Chloe said, her voice firm as she reached across the table and grabbed Elena's hand. You stop that right now. You are not stupid. You are a loving, wonderful woman who tried to make a life with a spineless coward. This is not on you. This is on him. So what's the plan? The question hung in the air. Plan, Elena echoed weakly. I don't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't spend another night in that house. I couldn't look at him. Good, Chloe said, her tone shifting into strategic mode. That's the first step. You and Leo stay here as long as you need. My house is your fortress. Tomorrow we make some calls. First you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A shark. A dragon. Someone who will make Richard and his mother regret the day they were born. The first call from Richard came at 7:05 a.m. Elena's phone buzzed angrily on the kitchen counter. She stared at it, her heart pounding. Don't, Chloe advised. Let it go to voicemail. You don't owe him a conversation. He called 7 more times in the next hour. Then came the texts. Elena, where are you? This isn't funny. You can't just take my son. Whatever you think I did, you're overreacting. Come home and we'll talk. My mother is very upset. The last text made Elena let out a bitter laugh. Of course Eleanor was upset. Her precious grandson was missing. Around 9 a.m., an unknown number flashed on the screen. Elena, on Chloe's advice, answered it, putting it on speaker. Elena. The voice was imperious and cold as ice. Eleanor Vance. Richard tells me you've had some sort of hysterical episode and have taken my grandson. This little tantrum ends now. Bring Leo home immediately. He is not your grandson to command Eleanor, Elena said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. And he is my son. I am well aware of the biological facts, dear, Eleanor sneered. A fact Richard was simply clarifying, I understand. You've always been a bit too emotional. Now be a good girl and stop this nonsense. You wouldn't want things to get unpleasant. It was a threat cloaked in condescension. You have no idea what unpleasant is, Elena said and hung up the phone. Her hand was trembling, but she felt a surge of adrenaline. The battle lines were drawn. Chloe had already been on her laptop. I've got a name, she announced. Jessica Davenport. Davenport & Associates. Specializes in high-conflict, high-asset divorces. Her nickname in the legal community is the Lioness. She eats men like Richard for breakfast. An hour later, Elena was sitting in a plush chair opposite Jessica Davenport. The lawyer was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a steel gray suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through to the heart of the matter. She listened to Elena's story without interruption, her face impassive. When Elena finished, Jessica leaned forward, her hands clasped on her large oak desk. Mr. Vance's comment at the bank was not just an insult. Elena, Jessica said, her voice calm and lethal. It was a gift. In family law, we often deal in nuances, and he said, she said. Your husband, in a public setting and in front of a verifiable third-party witness, effectively denied the legitimacy of your marriage and your role as a mother. He didn't just call you a surrogate. He framed you as a transactional party, not a maternal one, in a custody dispute that is pure gold. Hope, fierce and bright, bloomed in Elena's chest for the first time in 24 hours. What does that mean for me, for Leo? It means we move fast and we move aggressively, Jessica stated. We file for an emergency ex parte hearing. We request temporary sole legal and physical custody based on the grounds of potential emotional harm to the child and Mr. Vance's demonstrated denial of your parental status. We'll cite his statement as evidence that he does not view you as an equal co-parent, which puts the child's stable environment at risk. We'll also file for a temporary restraining order to keep him and his mother away from you and Leo until the hearing. It was a whirlwind. Elena felt like she was being swept up in a current far stronger than herself. But this time it was a current pulling her toward safety, not drowning her. She signed the papers, her hand steady. The next afternoon, they were in a sterile courtroom, a far cry from the opulent bank, but infinitely more terrifying. Elena sat beside Jessica, her back ramrod straight. Richard was on the other side of the room with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer who oozed corporate confidence. Richard looked tired and angry. He kept shooting Elena looks that vacillated between pleading and fury. He couldn't believe she had done this. He couldn't believe his little, compliant wife had declared war. Jessica presented their case to the judge, a stern-looking woman with graying hair and no-nonsense glasses. She laid out the events calmly and factually, her tone conveying the gravity of Richard's words. Your Honor, Mr. Vance's statement, "She's not my wife, just a surrogate," is a fundamental rejection of the marital partnership and the maternal bond. It indicates a belief that Mrs. Vance is not a parent with equal rights but a service provider who has fulfilled her contract. This creates a toxic and unstable environment for their 5-year-old son, Leo. We believe it's in the child's best interest that he remain in the sole care of his mother, the only parent by Mr. Vance's own admission who is fully committed to her role. Richard's lawyer blustered, calling it a gross mischaracterization and a misunderstanding. He painted Elena as hysterical and impulsive, but Jessica had an affidavit from Brenda, the bank clerk. Jessica had tracked her down. The clerk, horrified by what she had witnessed and shaken by the memory of Leo's confused little face, had agreed to provide a sworn statement confirming the exact wording and the cold, dismissive manner in which Richard had delivered the lines. When the judge read the affidavit, her expression tightened. She looked over her glasses at Richard, her gaze sharp and disapproving. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, her voice dangerously quiet, "did you or did you not refer to your wife of 7 years, the woman who gave birth to your son, as just the surrogate in a public place of business?" Richard paled. He stammered, "Your Honor, it was taken out of context. It's a complicated family situation." "It seems quite simple to me," the judge cut in, her voice like gravel. "It shows a profound lack of respect not only for your wife but for the institution of marriage and the role of a mother. That raises serious questions about your judgment." The ruling was swift and stunning. "Temporary sole physical and legal custody is granted to the mother, Elena Vance," the judge declared. "Mr. Vance, you are to have no contact with the child until a full hearing can be scheduled. A temporary restraining order is granted. I am also ordering you to pay temporary child and spousal support effective immediately. We will revisit this in 30 days, during which time I suggest you secure a family therapist and reflect deeply on what it means to be a husband and a father." Richard's jaw dropped. His lawyer looked stunned. A gasp was audible from the back of the courtroom where Eleanor Vance had slipped in her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. Elena felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled her knees. She had done it. She had protected her son. As she walked out of the courtroom, she passed Eleanor, whose eyes were slits of pure hatred. "You will regret this." Eleanor hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. We will crush you." Elena looked the older woman dead in the eye. The fear she had lived with for 7 years finally gone, replaced by something harder, something forged in the fires of betrayal. "No, Eleanor," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She walked away, head held high, leaving her mother-in-law standing there momentarily speechless. She had won the first battle. But Elena knew with chilling certainty that the war had just begun. The Vances would not take this defeat lying down. They would come for her with everything they had. The 30 days that followed the court hearing were a grueling war of attrition. The Vances, true to Eleanor's threat, unleashed their considerable power not with a single dramatic cannonball, but with 1,000 insidious cuts. It was a siege designed to isolate, exhaust, and break Elena. The first front was financial. Richard, under his mother's direct command, was ruthlessly efficient. The day after the hearing, the temporary support payment was intentionally late. The joint credit cards were canceled without notice, leaving Elena embarrassed at a grocery store checkout, her cart piled high with food for Leo. The most significant blow came when she discovered the Vance family lawyers had filed a motion to freeze the main joint savings account, claiming Elena's preemptive withdrawal was a misappropriation of marital assets. Suddenly, the cushion she had secured for herself and Leo was tied up in legal limbo. "They're trying to starve you out," Jessica Davenport said during an urgent phone call. "It's a classic tactic of the wealthy spouse. They want you so desperate that you'll be forced to crawl back and accept any terms they offer. We fight it, but the courts move slowly. You need to prepare for a lean few months." Elena, who had left her promising career in graphic design to be a full-time mother at Richard's insistence, a Vance child doesn't get raised by nannies, Eleanor had decreed, was now effectively unemployed and with dwindling resources. The Vance's strategy was clear: render her powerless, then paint her as an unstable provider. She spent her nights at Chloe's kitchen table, her laptop open, frantically updating her portfolio and applying for freelance work. Rejection emails piled up. The industry had moved on in the 6 years she'd been away. Her confidence, already fragile, began to crumble under the weight of financial anxiety. There were days she ate only toast so that Leo could have his chicken nuggets and fresh fruit. The second front was social. The Vance family matriarch Eleanor was a master of the whispered word and the poisoned well. Suddenly, Elena found herself ostracized from the circle of mothers and school acquaintances she had cultivated. Invitations to playdates dried up. Polite smiles were replaced with averted eyes and hurried conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. One afternoon, a mother she'd considered a friend, a woman named Sarah, approached her nervously in the park. "Elena," she started, wringing her hands, "I'm so sorry, but I don't think Leo can come to Oliver's birthday party on Saturday." "Oh, is everything okay?" Elena asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Sarah couldn't meet her eyes. "It's just... Eleanor Vance is a major benefactor for the hospital my husband works for. She made a call. She told people you were unstable, that you were prone to dramatic, erratic behavior, and that you'd kidnapped Leo. She implied you were after the Vance money." The words were a physical blow. They weren't just trying to take her son. They were trying to annihilate her character, to rewrite history so that she was the villain of her own story. "That's not true, Sarah," Elena said, her voice shaking. "You know me." "I know," Sarah whispered, looking miserable. "But I can't risk my husband's career. I'm so sorry." She scurried away, leaving Elena standing alone by the swing set, feeling more isolated than ever. Through it all, Leo was her anchor. He was too young to understand the legal or financial complexities, but he was exquisitely sensitive to the emotional undercurrents. He had more nightmares. He clung to her, asking for Daddy. In quiet moments, his brow furrowed with a confusion that broke Elena's heart. She created a bubble of determined cheerfulness for him. They had picnics on the living room floor, built magnificent Lego castles, and spent hours at the public library. She poured all the love and energy she had into ensuring his world felt safe and stable, even as hers was crumbling. It was in these moments that she found her resolve. Every time Leo laughed, every time he wrapped his small arms around her neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy," it was a reminder of what she was fighting for. Meanwhile, Richard's attempts at contact were sporadic and unsettling. They were never his own. They were clearly scripted by his mother and their lawyers. He'd send stilted emails, not asking how she was, but demanding an inventory of household items. One evening, a package arrived by courier. It was a children's book about divorce. Inside, a note in Richard's handwriting read, "Maybe this will help you explain to Leo why you've broken our family apart." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't a participant in the conflict. In his mind, he was a victim of her overreaction. But the siege intended to weaken her was having an unintended effect. It was forging Elena into something new. The fear was burning away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. The humiliation was hardening into resolve. One night, unable to sleep, she was sorting through a box of old documents she'd taken from the house, looking for anything that might help her case. Tucked away in a folder labeled IVF, she found something she had forgotten about. It was a legal document, a draft from early in their fertility journey drawn up by the Vance family's primary lawyer. Her blood ran cold as she read it. It wasn't a standard IVF consent form. It was a co-parenting and surrogacy agreement. A very specific, very brutal one. It stipulated that in the event of a successful pregnancy where Elena carried the child, she would be recognized as the gestational carrier. It laid out terms for relinquishing certain parental rights to Richard in the event of a separation, giving him sole decision-making power over the child's education, upbringing, and inheritance. It even contained a clause that in the event of Richard's death, primary custody would transfer not to Elena but to his parents Harrison and Eleanor Vance. She remembered the day Richard had presented it to her. They were in their beautiful sunlit kitchen. He'd been casual about it. "It's just a formality, darling. Mother's lawyers are just being thorough. You know how they are. Just sign it so we can move forward." Elena, even the younger, more pliable version of herself, had been horrified. "This is insane, Richard. This document makes me sound like a broodmare. It strips me of my rights as a mother." They had their first real fight that day. He'd accused her of not trusting him, of being difficult. She had refused to sign. She had torn it up in front of him, telling him they would proceed as husband and wife or not at all. Overwhelmed by his desire for a child, he had eventually relented, and they had moved forward with the standard clinic paperwork which listed them both as intended parents. She had thought that was the end of it, that she had won. Now, looking at this draft, she realized she hadn't won. She had only postponed the battle. This document was the blueprint for their entire worldview. In their minds, she was a surrogate one who had simply refused to sign the paperwork. Richard's comment in the bank wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was the articulation of a long-held, deeply ingrained belief. She immediately called Jessica. "I've found something," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "I think I found their playbook." Jessica's reaction was electric. "Elena, this is phenomenal. This isn't just a draft. It's a smoking gun. It demonstrates premeditation. It proves that their attempts to recharacterize you as a surrogate are not a recent fabrication in response to your leaving, but a long-standing strategy. This completely corroborates our narrative. They won't see it coming." A new twist emerged a week before the next hearing. Jessica received a call from an unknown number. It was Brenda, the bank clerk. She sounded terrified. "They found me," Brenda whispered into the phone. "A lawyer for the Vance family. He came to my house. He was very intimidating. He told me my memory of the event must be mistaken. He said Mr. Vance was under a lot of stress, and that I must have misunderstood a complex legal discussion. He suggested that it would be in my best interest to amend my affidavit, or perhaps not testify at all." "Did he threaten you, Brenda?" Jessica asked calmly. "He said that people in high places have long memories and that accusations can damage a person's career. It wasn't direct, but I knew what he meant. I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. I'm scared." "You have every right to be," Jessica soothed. "But what he did is called witness tampering, and it is a serious crime. Brenda, your testimony is crucial. It's the one piece of this puzzle that isn't from someone in the family. You are the impartial observer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elena, who was in Jessica's office for a strategy meeting, held her breath. "That poor woman," Brenda finally said, her voice filled with a surprising strength. "And her little boy." He asked his mom what a surrogate was. No kid should have to ask that. "I'll testify. I'm not going to let them bully me into letting them destroy that family." The pieces were falling into place. The Vances, in their arrogance, were overplaying their hand. Their attempts to intimidate and control had provided Elena and Jessica with the very weapons they needed. The night before the hearing, Elena tucked Leo into his bed in Chloe's guest room. "Mommy," he asked drowsily, "are we going to go home soon?" Elena smoothed his hair back from his forehead, her heart aching. "We are home, my love," she said softly. "Home is wherever you and I are together, and I promise you no one is ever going to take me away from you." He nodded, his eyes fluttering shut. She kissed his forehead and stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him sleep. The siege had been brutal, but she had not broken. She was no longer just defending herself. She was on the attack. Tomorrow in court she would not be the timid wife or the hysterical runaway. She would be Elena Leo's mother, and she would be the one to burn their kingdom to the ground. The air in courtroom 4B was stale and thick with a potent mixture of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and unspoken animosity. This was a larger, more imposing chamber than the one used for the emergency hearing, its dark wood paneling and high ceilings designed to convey the gravity of the law. The gallery was peppered with onlookers. A few journalists who had caught wind of a high society scandal, and several immaculately dressed women who were clearly friends of Eleanor Vance, there to witness what they assumed would be the swift and brutal dismantling of a social upstart. Elena sat at the plaintiff's table beside Jessica Davenport, her posture a study in quiet defiance. She had deliberately chosen to wear the same simple navy dress from that fateful day at the bank. It was her armor, a silent testament to the moment that had started it all. Her hands, which had trembled for weeks, now rested calmly in her lap. She was no longer a victim of circumstances. She was the architect of this reckoning. Across the aisle, the Vance contingent was a portrait of entitled fury. Richard sat hunched between his lead counsel, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Marcus Thorne, and his mother. Eleanor Vance, draped in a severe charcoal gray suit with a diamond brooch glinting like a shard of ice at her throat, surveyed the room as if it were a poorly managed country club she was considering shutting down. Her gaze swept over Elena with a dismissive coldness that could have frozen water. Marcus Thorne began, his voice booming with manufactured confidence. His strategy was clear: bury Elena under an avalanche of financial insinuation. He called a forensic accountant to the stand, a prim man who, with the help of a dozen complex charts, proceeded to paint a picture of Elena as a cunning and materialistic schemer. He detailed her systematic withdrawals from the joint account in the weeks leading up to her departure, the value of jewelry Richard had gifted her over the years, and a luxury vacation they had taken 2 years prior. "So, as you can see, Your Honor," Thorne concluded with a flourish, "Ms. Vance's actions are consistent with a person planning a significant financial event, namely absconding with marital assets in preparation for a lucrative divorce." When it was Jessica's turn to cross-examine, she approached the witness with a deceptively calm demeanor. "Mr. Davies," she began, "you've detailed these systematic withdrawals. Could you please pull up Exhibit C, the one showing the transactions from the month before my client left her home?" The chart reappeared on the screen. "Thank you," Jessica said. "This withdrawal for $287.50 on the 4th. Where was that made?" The accountant peered at his notes. "At a Shop and Save grocery store. And this one for $89.99 on the 12th? Kids Closet, a children's clothing store." Jessica continued down the list, her voice even and methodical. "A payment to the pediatrician, a charge for Leo's tumbling class, the purchase of school supplies." "Mr. Davies, does this look like the spending pattern of a woman liquidating assets for a secret escape? Or does it look like the spending pattern of a mother buying groceries, clothes, and paying for her child's activities?" The accountant shifted uncomfortably. "Well, when viewed in isolation." "Let's view it in context then," Jessica pressed. "The grand total of these systematic withdrawals over a 6-week period was just over $4,000, correct? From an account that before being frozen by your client had a balance of nearly $200,000. "The numbers are correct," he conceded. "Thank you, Mr. Davies. No further questions." Jessica walked back to her table, having effortlessly reframed the Vance's narrative from one of greed to one of petty cruelty. They weren't just rich. They were trying to stop a mother from buying her son's school shoes. Thorne's next witness was a child psychologist, Dr. Alistair Finch, who spoke in smooth therapeutic tones about the potential trauma of parental alienation and the importance of stability. It was a clear attempt to paint Elena's flight as a selfish act that had harmed Leo. On cross-examination, Jessica leaned forward. Doctor, you speak of a stable environment. Would you agree that a core component of such an environment is mutual respect between the parents? Absolutely, Dr. Finch agreed, smiling serenely. It's paramount. And would you agree that children even at 5 years old are incredibly perceptive to emotional discord and disrespect between their parents? Yes, they are like emotional barometers. So, Jessica's voice sharpened slightly. If a child were to witness his father publicly deny that his mother is his wife and instead label her as just a surrogate, a term the child wouldn't even understand, what kind of impact might that have on the child's sense of stability and security? Dr. Finch's professional smile faltered. That would be highly confusing and distressing for a child. It would undermine the very foundation of the family unit in the child's mind. It would, in fact, be a profound act of disrespect, wouldn't you say? One that would cause significant emotional harm? Objection, Thorne called out. Counsel is leading the witness. Sustained. Rephrase, Ms. Davenport. The judge instructed, though she was watching the exchange with keen interest. Certainly, Your Honor, Jessica said. Dr. Finch, would such a statement made by a father about a mother in front of their child be considered conducive to a healthy, respectful, and stable environment? The doctor cleared his throat. No, it would be the opposite. Thank you, Doctor. The very opposite. The momentum had shifted palpably. It was now Jessica's turn to present her case. Her first call was Brenda Peters, the bank clerk. Brenda walked to the stand, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, a woman of ordinary life thrust into a high-stakes drama. Yet when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. She recounted the events of that day, her testimony, a damningly simple recitation of the facts. Thorne attempted to dismantle her on cross-examination. Ms. Peters, you attend to dozens of clients a day. You deal with complex financial matters. Isn't it possible that you simply misheard Mr. Vance? That his words were taken out of context? Brenda looked not at Thorne, but directly at the judge. Your Honor, I have worked in customer-facing roles for my entire adult life. I know when someone is talking about finances, and I know when someone is being deliberately cruel. Mr. Vance wasn't looking at a document. He waved his hand at Mrs. Vance at Elena as if she were an object, and he said those words. They were meant to diminish her. There was no other context. Thorne, frustrated, tried a different tack. You have a personal bias, don't you? You felt sorry for Ms. Vance, and so your memory has been colored by emotion. Brenda took a deep breath. I felt sorry for her, yes. But that's not what this is about. I'm here because last Tuesday a man from your law firm, a Mr. Jennings, came to my home. He sat in my living room and told me that the Vance family were important people, and that it would be a shame if a misunderstanding were to negatively impact my career. He suggested I might want to revise my affidavit to state I couldn't clearly recall the conversation. He called it finding a more accurate memory. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Jessica rose slowly. Your Honor, I believe what Ms. Peters is describing is witness tampering. The judge's face was thunderous. She fixed her gaze on Marcus Thorne, who looked as if he'd been struck. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice dangerously low, is a Mr. Jennings an associate at your firm? Thorne's face was ashen. He is a junior associate, Your Honor. I was not aware of his actions. It was a feeble defense, and everyone in the room knew it. The Vance's credibility was not just damaged, it was incinerated. Next, Jessica called the dragon into her own lair. The plaintiff calls Eleanor Vance. Eleanor strode to the stand, her composure a mask of granite, but Jessica could see the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Mrs. Vance. Jessica started, her tone even. You heard Dr. Finch's testimony about the importance of parental respect. Do you respect Elena as the mother of your grandson? I respect her role. Eleanor answered, the distinction deliberate and sharp. Just her role, not the person. Her role is what is relevant to my grandson. Jessica held up the plastic sleeve document. Your Honor, I am entering into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit 14. It is a draft agreement your lawyers prepared for Elena to sign before she underwent IVF. Mrs. Vance, do you recognize it? Eleanor's eyes narrowed. It was a prudent legal document to protect my family's interests. Let's examine those interests, Jessica said, walking towards the witness box. Clause 4B states that in the event of a separation, Elena would relinquish all primary decision-making rights regarding the child's education and medical care to Richard. Clause 7C states that in the event of your son Richard's death, sole custody of Leo would be transferred to you and your husband. Is that correct? A boy like Leo needs to be raised with a certain structure. We wanted to ensure his legacy. Eleanor sniffed. So a 5-year-old child has a legacy, but his own mother doesn't have rights. Jessica's voice was sharp as a scalpel. Isn't it true, Mrs. Vance, that you have never not for 1 second seen Elena as a member of your family, that you saw her as a biological necessity, a vessel hired to produce a Vance heir, who then had the audacity to believe she was entitled to be a mother? The dam of Eleanor's composure finally broke, her face contorted in a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. Entitled. That girl came from nothing, a suburban family with no name, no connections. She should have been on her knees with gratitude. That my son gave her a life she could only dream of. Leo is a Vance. He has our blood. He needed to be protected from her commonness, her sentimentality. The vicious words echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. She had confessed to the core accusation, her arrogance blinding her to the damage she was inflicting. Richard stared at his mother, his face a mask of horror as if seeing her for the first time. The final witness was Richard himself. He walked to the stand like a man heading to his own execution. He was pale, broken. Jessica didn't attack. Her voice was soft, almost sympathetic. Richard, she began, dropping the formal Mr. Vance. Let's go back. Tell me about the day you and Elena found out the IVF had worked. He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. It was the happiest day of my life, he whispered. We just held each other and cried. And the day Leo was born. When you held him for the first time and you looked at Elena, the woman who had gone through all of that to give you this child, what did you feel for her? A sob escaped Richard's throat. Everything. I felt everything. Gratitude. Awe. So much love I thought my heart would burst. He finally turned and looked at Elena, his face pleading. She was my world. What happened to that man Richard? Jessica asked gently. Where did he go? The man who felt all that love, who saw his wife as his world. How did he become the man who could dismiss her in a bank in front of her son as just a surrogate? Richard's gaze drifted helplessly towards his mother. The answer hung unspoken in the air. He was a man caught in a web woven of money expectation and his mother's suffocating will. I was a coward. He finally wept, his voice cracking. I let her. I let the pressure. I thought it was just easier to say the words to keep the peace. I never imagined it would end like this. I destroyed everything. I destroyed my own family. He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with racking sobs. It wasn't a performance. It was the complete and utter collapse of a man who had finally realized the catastrophic price of his own weakness. The judge delivered her ruling after a short recess. She removed her glasses and looked down from the bench, her expression one of profound disappointment and disgust. She spoke at length about the sanctity of the parent-child bond and the legal and moral definition of a mother. She addressed Eleanor directly. Mrs. Vance, this court finds your worldview to be not only archaic and offensive, but poisonous. You see your grandson not as a child to be loved, but as a possession to be curated. Your influence is toxic, and I am ensuring it ends today. Then she turned to Richard. Mr. Vance, your tears may be genuine today, but they come far too late. A man's character is not defined by his feelings, but by his actions, especially under pressure. You failed your wife, and you failed your son in the most fundamental way. You allowed your marriage to be denigrated and your wife to be humiliated. You are not at this time a fitting custodian for this child." The final words were delivered with the force of a hammer blow. Therefore, this court awards sole legal and physical custody of the child Leo Vance to his mother, Elena Vance. The temporary support order is made permanent. Mr. Vance will be granted supervised visitation every other Saturday contingent upon proof of his weekly attendance at individual therapy. He is to have no unsupervised contact with the child until such time as a therapist can attest to this court that he understands the gravity of his actions. The gavel fell. The sound was finite. Final. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over Elena so powerfully she felt dizzy. It was over. She had won. She had. Jessica gave her hand a firm, triumphant squeeze. Across the room, Richard sat motionless, a hollowed-out shell. Eleanor, however, rose to her feet, her face contorted with a rage so pure it was terrifying. She shot Elena a look that promised a lifetime of enmity, then turned and swept out of the courtroom a queen dethroned, leaving her broken son behind. Months later, the oppressive gray of the courtroom had been replaced by the warm, buttery yellow Elena had painted the walls of her new two-bedroom apartment. Life was smaller, but infinitely brighter. She had found a job at a vibrant marketing firm, and while the pay was less, the satisfaction of earning her own way was immeasurable. Leo was thriving, his nightmares gone, replaced by the easy laughter of a child who feels secure. One evening, after tucking Leo into bed, Elena's phone buzzed. It was Richard. She hesitated, then answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of its old entitled cadence. "Elena, I've been going to therapy 3 times a week." He paused. "He's making me see things. The way I let my mother's voice become my own. The way I took you for granted. The way I saw your love as an obligation I was owed, not a gift I had to cherish." He took a shaky breath. "I know sorry is a useless word. It doesn't fix anything. But I am sorry, Elena. I'm sorry for the man I became. I'm sorry for not being the man you married." A year ago, his words might have sparked anger, or even a flicker of hope for reconciliation. Now they did neither. Elena felt a sense of calm closure. "I'm glad you're getting help, Richard," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Do it for yourself, and do it so one day you can be the father Leo deserves. Is there any chance for us?" he asked, his voice small. "The us you're thinking of is gone, Richard," she replied without malice. "I'm not Elena Vance anymore. I'm Elena Reyes, and I'm happy." She ended the call, looking around the small, peaceful living room that was all hers. She was not a surrogate. She was not a possession. She was not defined by a man's weakness or a family's arrogance. She was a mother, a creator, a survivor. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. And in the quiet of her new life, she was for the first time truly, completely free. Elena's story is a powerful testament to the fact that our worth is not defined by how others see us, but by how we fight for ourselves. A thoughtless, cruel comment was the catalyst. But it was Elena's strength that turned a moment of public humiliation into a declaration of independence. She teaches us that true family isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts, but about love, respect, and the courage to protect that love against all odds. Her battle wasn't just for custody, it was for her soul, and in winning she reclaimed not only her son, but her own identity. A man's home is his castle, but for tech millionaire Arthur Pembroke, his multi-million-dollar mansion was a fortress. After his free-spirited wife, Genevieve, vanished without a trace, he did what any man of logic and means would do. He hardened his defenses. He changed every lock, upgraded every sensor, and sealed his life off from the woman he believed had abandoned him. But just days later, in the dead of night, his impenetrable security system detected a ghost, a single silent alert from a place he never thought to check: the attic. What followed was not a search for a missing person, but the terrifying unraveling of a marriage, a man's sanity, and the unthinkable truth that was hiding right above his head. The Pembroke estate in Atherton, California wasn't a home. It was a statement. A sprawling testament to Arthur Pembroke's genius carved from glass steel and muted Italian marble. It was a place of straight lines, precise angles, and automated everything from the curtains that silently greeted the dawn to the security system that monitored the perimeter with the unblinking eye of a predator. Arthur, the architect of a billion-dollar data analytics empire, had designed his life with the same meticulous, ruthless efficiency. Everything had a place, a purpose, a quantifiable value. Everything, that is, except his wife Genevieve. Genevieve was the one variable Arthur could never quite solve. Where he was logic, she was art. Where he saw data points, she saw color and chaos. Her art studio, the one concession to disorder he allowed in the house, was a vibrant explosion of half-finished canvases, clay-spattered floors, and the sharp, intoxicating scent of turpentine. She was a whirlwind of emotion in his sterile world, a splash of reckless crimson on his monochrome palette. For 7 years, this opposition had been the source of their attraction. Now it was the chasm between them. The argument, the one that would precede the silence, was about something as trivial and as profound as a gala. The Prometheus Initiative Gala. A night for Silicon Valley royalty to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy. "It's non-negotiable, Jen," Arthur had said, not looking up from the tablet that was a permanent extension of his hand. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a garden so perfectly manicured it looked like a computer rendering. "My name is on the sponsorship list. Our presence is required." Genevieve was by the fireplace, its gas-powered flames dancing prettily, but offering no real warmth. She was twisting a silver ring on her finger, a habit she had when she felt cornered. "Your name, Arthur, not ours. I'm just the handbag, the wife accessory you trot out to prove you have a human side." "That's absurd," he clipped, finally looking at her. His gaze was sharp, analytical. He wasn't hearing her feelings. He was parsing her statement for logical fallacies. "Our partnership is a strategic asset." "A strategic asset?" She repeated the words, tasting like poison. "Is that what we are? Did you run the numbers on our marriage? Calculate the ROI on my love. Don't be dramatic. This is about maintaining the image that affords you your hobby." He gestured vaguely in the direction of her studio. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the moment the words left his lips. He saw the light in her vibrant green eyes flicker and die. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just went still, a terrifying, absolute stillness. "You're right," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "It's a very expensive hobby." She turned and walked out of the room. Arthur, assuming this was merely a temporary ceasefire, went back to his tablet. He expected her to reappear in an hour, perhaps with a sarcastic apology that they would both pretend was sincere. He expected the familiar rhythm of their conflict and resolution. But the hour passed. Then 2. When dinner time came, the automated kitchen had prepared his usual meal of grilled salmon and asparagus, but the place setting across from him remained empty. He ate alone in the cavernous dining hall, the silence broken only by the click of his fork on the plate. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He sent a text. "This is childish. Come down." No reply. By 10 p.m., annoyance had curdled into a strange, unfamiliar unease. He walked through the house. Her studio was dark. Her car, a vintage convertible she adored, was still in the garage. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her keys beside it. Her phone, he discovered, was lying on her bedside table. She had left with nothing. He told himself she'd gone for a walk to clear her head, that she was at her friend Bianca's house venting. But as midnight crept in, painting long distorted shadows across the marble floors, a colder, more pragmatic thought took root. She had left. Not just the room, but him. the ultimate illogical act of defiance. Arthur Pembroke did not panic. Panic was an inefficient emotion. Instead, he initiated a protocol. The next morning, he didn't call the police. He called his lawyer. "My wife has left." He stated, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "I want to understand the preliminary steps for asset protection. I assume she'll make a claim." Then he called a man named Dimitri, a private security contractor whose entire business was discretion and impenetrable systems. "Dimitri," Arthur said, pacing his office, "I need a complete system overhaul at the residence. Every lock digital and physical. New access codes for all staff. I want it done by sundown." "Is there a specific threat, Mr. Pembroke?" Dimitri asked. "The threat is ambiguity," Arthur replied. "I'm eliminating it." That afternoon, a team of quiet, efficient men descended upon the estate. They replaced the locks on the towering front doors, the service entrances, the French doors leading to the garden, and even the lock on the door to Genevieve's studio. By dusk, the Pembroke estate was more fortress than ever. Arthur stood in the center of his silent home, the new master key card feeling heavy and cold in his hand. He felt a sense of control return. He had identified a vulnerability in his life, and he had patched it. He believed he was now secure. He was locking her out. He never considered for a single moment that he might be locking her in. 3 days of silence passed. Arthur moved through his life with chilling precision. He attended the Prometheus Gala alone, offering a terse and practiced explanation for his wife's absence. "Genevieve is feeling under the weather. A sudden bug." He networked, he smiled, he drank precisely 2 glasses of champagne, and he left at exactly 10:30 p.m. To any observer, he was the picture of a man in control. But inside the glass fortress, the silence was beginning to change. It was no longer a peaceful absence of sound, but a heavy, presence-filled void. The house felt vast and empty, its automated systems humming like a mechanical ghost. Genevieve's best friend, a fiery art gallery owner named Bianca, was the first to officially sound the alarm. She bombarded Arthur's phone with calls and texts. "Arthur, where is she? She missed our lunch. She's not answering. This isn't like her." "She needed some space," Arthur replied via text, refusing to speak with her directly. "Space Gen doesn't do space without a 10-page manifesto and a bottle of wine. I'm coming over." When Bianca arrived, she was met by the new, unyielding reality of the estate. The intercom buzzed, and Arthur's disembodied voice was the only welcome she received. "She's not here, Bianca." "Then let me in. Let me see her studio. Maybe she left a note." "I've looked. There's nothing. I'll let you know if I hear from her." The intercom clicked off. Bianca, enraged and terrified, did what Arthur had failed to do. She called the Atherton Police Department. The arrival of Detective Cade Harding was an unwelcome intrusion into Arthur's sanitized world. Harding was a man who looked like he'd been carved from weathered oak. He was in his late 50s, with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by wealth or technology. He moved with a slow, deliberate pace that Arthur found infuriating. They sat in the living room, the detective refusing the offer of sparkling water. "So, Mr. Pembroke," Harding began, his voice a low gravel, "your wife Genevieve has been missing for 4 days now, but you didn't report it. Her friend did. Why is that?" "I didn't believe her to be missing," Arthur stated, his posture rigid. "I believed she had left me. I was respecting her decision." "Respecting it or accepting it?" "Big difference," Harding mused, looking around the room. "You two have an argument Tuesday night. A disagreement. About a social obligation. Bianca, her friend, said she was very upset. Said you two had been fighting a lot lately. About her feeling... What was the word she used? Ornamental." Arthur's jaw tightened. Bianca is prone to drama. Genevieve was emotional. Our marriage was not without its complexities, but it was stable. So stable that you had all the locks changed the day after she took some space, Harding asked, his gaze unwavering. That seems fast, almost like you were erasing her. It was a security measure. Arthur countered the logic, feeling flimsy even to him now. An open-ended departure creates a security vulnerability. My work requires absolute discretion and safety. Right. Your work, Harding said, a hint of skepticism in his tone. He stood up and walked towards the fireplace. Mind if I look around her studio, maybe? Arthur reluctantly led him to Genevieve's studio. The door, which had once been adorned with paint smudges and streaks of color, was now pristine. The new lock gleamed under the track lighting. Inside, the chaos was contained. Everything was exactly as she had left it. A canvas on an easel depicted a beautiful, intricate bird with shimmering feathers trapped inside a cage made of what looked like computer code. Harding stared at it for a long moment. Tells a story, doesn't it? The detective murmured. The official investigation began. Harding and his team were thorough. They interviewed the staff, all of whom had been given new access cards and instructions not to speak about the Pembrokes' private life. They spoke to Bianca, who painted a picture of a vibrant woman slowly being suffocated by a loveless transactional marriage. They spoke to Arthur's sister Audrey, a sharp-tongued woman who had never warmed to Genevieve. Let's be honest, Detective, Audrey had said over the phone from her home in Boston. Genevieve was a lovely girl, but she was a dreamer. Arthur built an empire. They were speaking different languages. I'm surprised it lasted this long. He's better off, frankly. Less distraction. The detectives found no evidence of foul play. No signs of a struggle. Genevieve's bank accounts were untouched. Her credit cards were unused. Her passport was in the safe. The narrative solidified. Genevieve Pembroke, an unhappy wife, had walked away from her gilded cage with nothing but the clothes on her back, seeking a new life, free from her controlling husband. The media caught wind of the story. Tech mogul's wife vanishes. Arthur's carefully constructed image began to crack. He was portrayed as a cold, unfeeling automaton, a man who changed the locks before he shed a tear. The public narrative was a conviction in itself. Arthur retreated deeper into his fortress, his frustration mounting. He was a man who solved problems. This was a problem he couldn't solve with money or code. The police were useless. The media was a pack of jackals. He was alone, surrounded by the ghost of his wife, her absence a screaming indictment. He felt a rage he hadn't felt in years, a rage at her for creating this chaos, for making him the villain in a story he didn't write. The house was secure, but his world was falling apart. It happened on the 8th night of her absence. The house was tomb silent. Arthur was in his office, a sanctuary of glowing screens and humming servers, trying to lose himself in lines of code. Sleep had become a foreign country he could no longer visit. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the unfinished painting in her studio, the bird in the digital cage. At 2:17 a.m., a notification pinged on his central control panel, a small, discrete sound he had programmed himself. It was not the jarring alarm of a perimeter breach, but a low-priority internal alert. He glanced at it, annoyed at the distraction. Alert motion detected. Zone attic. Sensor M7. Arthur stared at the screen. The attic. It was impossible. The attic was a dead space, a repository for forgotten things, old furniture from the previous owner's seasonal decorations. They never used boxes of his old academic papers. It was sealed, locked, and fortified like every other part of the house. The motion sensor up there, M7, was an old one, part of the original system he'd kept on the grid more for the sake of completion than actual security. His first thought was a malfunction. A glitch. A rat. He was a man of logic. He ran a diagnostic on the sensor. Status M7. Okay. Voltage normal. Connectivity stable. The system insisted it was working perfectly. Another ping. Alert motion detected. Zone attic. Sensor M7. A cold dread, utterly illogical and deeply unsettling, trickled down his spine. A rat wouldn't trigger the sensor twice in such a short span. The sensors were calibrated to detect heat signatures and mass above a certain threshold specifically to avoid false alarms from rodents. He pulled up the architectural schematic of the house on one of his monitors, zooming in on the third floor. The attic spanned the entire length of the main wing. Access was through a single drop-down ladder in the ceiling of the second-floor hallway, a hallway he hadn't walked down in months. He got up, his movements stiff. The silence of the house seemed to press in on him as he left the humming sanctuary of his office. He walked up the floating glass staircase to the second floor. The hallway was dark, the motion-activated lights casting pools of sterile white light at his feet as he moved. He stood directly below the access panel in the ceiling. It was a faint white square, seamless and unobtrusive. There was a key for the panel lock, a simple old-fashioned metal key that was kept in a security box in his office. He hadn't touched it since they moved in. He told himself this was ridiculous. It was a spider building a web over the sensor lens. It was a draft. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The absolute certainty that he was not alone in his impenetrable fortress. He went back to his office, retrieved the key, and returned to the hallway. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, disorderly rhythm that offended his sense of control. His hand was slick with sweat as he inserted the key into the nearly invisible lock on the panel. He turned the key. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. A folding ladder was attached to the door. He pulled it down, its metal sections unfolding with a series of loud, echoing clanks that sounded like gunshots in the dead quiet. He paused, listening. There was nothing. Just the whisper of the air conditioning. Dust motes danced in the beam of his phone's flashlight as he pointed it up into the dark maw of the attic. The air that wafted down was stale and thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten time. "Hello!" he called out, his voice sounding thin and foreign. The silence that answered was absolute. Steeling himself, he began to climb the metal rungs cold beneath his hands. His head and shoulders emerged into the darkness. He swept the flashlight beam across the space. It was exactly as he remembered it, only bigger and more menacing in the dark. A vast, shadowy expanse under the high-peaked roof filled with shapes draped in white dust cloths, looking like a congregation of ghosts. Boxes were stacked against the far wall. The floor was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed dust. Undisturbed. He swept the light across the floorboards again, more carefully this time. And there it was. In the thick gray dust, faint but unmistakable, were scuff marks. Not footprints, but the marks of something being dragged. And near the center of the room, directly under the M7 sensor mounted on a roof beam, the dust was slightly disturbed, smudged, as if someone had been standing there. Recently. A cold wave washed over him. He scanned the entire space again. The rafters, the corners, behind the shrouded furniture. Nothing. No one. He retreated back down the ladder, his mind racing, trying to fit this new impossible data into a logical framework. An intruder. How they would have had to bypass the perimeter alarm, somehow get to the second floor undetected, and pick the specialized lock on the attic panel. It made no sense. A homeless person. A squatter in Atherton. In his house, he pushed the ladder back up the panel ceiling with a solid thud. He locked it and returned to his office, the image of the smudged dust burned into his brain. He sat in front of his monitors, but he wasn't looking at code anymore. He was staring at the small green icon for sensor M7. It was dormant, quiescent, but he knew it was lying. That night, Arthur Pembroke did not sleep at all. He sat in the dark, watching the monitor, waiting for the ghost in his machine to move again. The fortress was no longer a refuge. It was a trap, and he was inside it with something he couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't control. The days that followed were a slow-motion collapse of Arthur's psyche. The man who lived by data and predictable outcomes was now haunted by a single erratic variable, the motion sensor in his attic. It would go off at random, maddening intervals, sometimes twice in an hour, followed by a full day of silence. Once it pinged relentlessly every 15 minutes between 3:00 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., a systematic torment that felt almost deliberate. Each time, Arthur would check the attic. He installed a high-resolution low-light camera pointed directly at the spot beneath the sensor, but the footage showed nothing, just an empty, dusty space. He would climb the ladder, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and find nothing but the same faint smudges in the dust, perhaps a fraction more pronounced than before. He started talking to himself. "It's the wiring," he'd mutter, pacing his office. "The temperature fluctuations are causing the passive infrared sensor to misfire." He spent an entire day researching the sensor's technical specifications, trying to find a logical explanation. He convinced himself it was a faulty unit and ordered a new one. Dmitri, the security contractor, came to install it. He was a broad, impassive man who never asked questions. "You want a new sensor for the attic, Mr. Pembroke? No problem. And run a full diagnostic on the entire Zone 7 loop," Arthur commanded. "Check for shorts, for power surges, anything." Dimitri's report came back an hour later. "System is clean, Mr. Pembroke. The old sensor passed all diagnostics, but the new one is in, top of the line. Won't get a false positive from a hummingbird's fart." That night at 1:48 a.m. the new sensor went off. Alert motion detected. Zone attic, sensor M7B. Arthur felt a tremor of genuine fear. This wasn't a glitch. It was real. Something was up there. Something that was smart enough to evade a camera. His obsession became all-consuming. His multi-billion-dollar company, the monument to his intellect, began to suffer. He missed virtual board meetings. His replies to urgent emails became terse and nonsensical. He spent hours, days, staring at the security feed from the attic camera, his eyes burning, looking for a shadow that wasn't there. A flicker of movement the sensor could see, but the camera couldn't. He started hearing things. A soft creak of a floorboard from above when the house was supposed to be silent. A faint whisper-like sound that could have been the wind but wasn't. He was living on black coffee and a gnawing paranoia. He lost weight. His tailored suits hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles pooled under his eyes, making him look like a haunted man. His sister Audrey called, her voice sharp with concern. "Arthur, I spoke to your CFO. He said you're completely disengaged. What is going on? Is this about Genevieve?" "I'm handling it." Arthur snapped, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Handling it? You sound terrible. People are talking. They're saying you've lost it, that the stress of her leaving has broken you." "I have not broken," he roared, slamming his hand on his desk. He looked at the monitor displaying the attic feed. Empty, silent, mocking him. "I'm just working through a complex problem." Detective Harding called for an update, his voice laced with professional pity. "Mr. Pembroke, we've exhausted all our leads. No financial activity, no contact with friends. The consensus is she's gone off-grid. We're scaling back the active search. Of course, the case remains open." "You're giving up," Arthur said, the words flat. "We're prioritizing resources," Harding corrected gently. "Unless some new evidence comes to light. Is there anything, Mr. Pembroke? Anything at all you haven't told us?" Arthur thought of the sensor alerts, of the sounds. He opened his mouth to tell him, but stopped. What would he say? That his house was haunted, that a ghost was triggering his state-of-the-art security system. They already thought he was a cold-hearted eccentric on the verge of a breakdown. This would confirm it. They might even think he was fabricating it to distract from his own potential involvement. "No, detective," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Nothing new." The worst part was the doubt. He would stand in the stark minimalist kitchen in the middle of the night, the silence of the house pressing down on him, and wonder if it was all in his head. Was this what grief was? A phantom limb, an ache for a person who was gone? Was his mind, his most prized asset betraying him, creating a mystery to distract from the simple, painful truth that his wife had found him so unbearable she had vanished into thin air. He set up audio recorders in the attic. Tiny voice-activated devices hidden in the corners. For 2 days they recorded nothing but silence. Then on the third night he played back the recording and heard it. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the low hum of the house's ventilation system, but it was there. A sound. A soft, choked sob. It lasted only a second, but it was undeniably human. Arthur felt the floor drop out from under him. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't his imagination. It was a person. A person hiding in his attic for almost 2 weeks. A person who was crying. The possibilities crashed through his mind, each more terrifying than the last. A deranged stalker. A meticulous thief waiting for the right moment to strike. But how did they get in? And how had they survived for so long? There was no food up there. No water. He replayed the sound of the sob again and again, turning the volume up, filtering out the background noise. It was a sound of profound despair. And beneath the despair there was something else. Something horribly, terrifyingly familiar. He froze, his hand trembling on the mouse. He closed his eyes, focusing only on the sound. The pitch. The cadence of the breath. He knew that sob. He had heard it once before, years ago, when Genevieve's mother had passed away. It was the sound of her heart breaking. It couldn't be. His mind rebelled against the notion. It was a logical impossibility. A madness. She was gone. Her car was here, her phone, her purse. She had walked out. The police believed it. Her friends believed it. He believed it. But the sound was Genevieve. His entire reality tilted on its axis. If it was her, why? Why would she hide in the dusty, dark attic of the very house she was so desperate to escape? Why would she subject herself to that? And then a colder, more horrifying thought pierced through his confusion. He had changed the locks the day after she disappeared. He had sealed the house. The attic access was a drop-down ladder from the inside. There was no other way in or out. If she had gone up there the night they argued, perhaps to hide, perhaps to think, and he had locked the house down. She wasn't hiding. She was trapped. Trapped by him. For 13 days. In the dark. With no food, no water, listening to him move about his life below. The sob wasn't just despair. It was the sound of someone giving up. The orderly, precise world of Arthur Pembroke shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't the victim of a mysterious disappearance. He was a monster. He was a jailer who didn't even know he had a prisoner. The realization was a physical blow. Arthur staggered back from his desk, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He saw the last 2 weeks through a new horrific lens, his coldness, his immediate call to his lawyer, his order to change the locks. He had acted not like a concerned husband, but like a man sealing a tomb. Genevieve. Trapped. Listening. He pictured her huddled in the dark, hearing the security team moving through the house, the clicks of the new locks slotting into place, sealing her fate. Hearing him leave for the gala. Hearing him eat his solitary meals. Hearing her friend Bianca plead at the intercom, only to be turned away by his cold, disembodied voice. The motion sensor alerts weren't a ghost. They were a desperate cry for help. The scuff marks in the dust were from her growing weaker, trying to get his attention. The sob he had recorded was the sound of her hope finally dying. How was she even alive? Humans could survive weeks without food, but only days without water. His mind, now frantic and desperate for a solution rather than an explanation, seized on a single detail of the house's architecture. The attic had old copper piping running through it, part of the original plumbing for the house before its modern renovation. On humid nights, condensation would form on those pipes. It wouldn't be much, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was enough. He had to go up there. Now. But how? If he stormed up shouting her name, he might frighten her to death. She was likely weak, terrified, and in a fragile mental state. He had to be careful. He went to the kitchen, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He filled a large bottle with water and grabbed a handful of protein bars from the pantry. He found a blanket in a linen closet. It felt like a pitifully small offering for the horrors he had inflicted. He returned to the second-floor hallway, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He pulled down the ladder, the metallic clatter sounding like an accusation in the silent house. This time he didn't call out. He just started climbing the supplies clutched in one hand. As his head rose into the attic space, the beam of his powerful flashlight cut a wide, bright path through the oppressive darkness. He swept it across the familiar scene of shrouded furniture and stacked boxes. "Jen," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Genevieve, are you here? It's me. It's Arthur." Silence. The thick, dead silence of a place that holds a terrible secret. He pulled himself all the way into the attic, placing the water and food gently on the dusty floorboards. "Jen, please. I know you're here. I heard you. I am so sorry." He moved slowly, deliberately, sweeping the light into every corner, behind every shape. He was terrified of what he might find. And then he saw it. Behind a large, cloth-draped armoire from a bygone era, he saw a small collection of objects that did not belong. He moved closer, his breath catching in his throat. There was a small, grimy jam jar holding perhaps an inch of murky water. He looked up and saw where it had come from, a slow, steady drip of condensation from an old copper pipe directly above. It was her water source. Beside it lay a small, antique wooden box. It was her mother's jewelry box, though he knew she kept nothing of value in it anymore. Just old letters, photographs, sentimental trifles. This must be what she came for the night she disappeared. She had come to retrieve the one thing that was purely hers, a link to a life before him, before the gilded cage. And then he saw the nest. In a small alcove between two stacks of boxes, she had pulled down several of the dusty cloths from the furniture and fashioned a makeshift bed. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking sight. On the floor beside the nest of cloths was a piece of splintered floorboard. On its surface, something had been scratched over and over with a nail or a sharp rock. It was a calendar, 13 vertical lines with the 14th started but unfinished. He was standing in her prison cell, a cell he had created. He swept the light around the nest one more time, and it fell upon a small notebook open to a page filled with faint, spidery handwriting. It was one of his old engineering notebooks she must have found in a box. He picked it up with a trembling hand. The writing was weak, the sentences fragmented. It was her diary of captivity. Day 3. The locks. I heard them. Click, click, click. All day. Dimitri's voice. Arthur told him to change everything. He thinks I left. He didn't even look for me. He just deleted me. Day 5. So thirsty. The pipes sweat at night. Taste like metal and dust. Better than nothing. I heard Bianca at the door. I wanted to scream, but I was too weak and too afraid. What would he do if he found me day 8? The sensor. I saw the little red light blink when I stood under it. Maybe he will see. Maybe the machine will tell him I am here. The machine is the only thing he listens to. Day 11. He came up. I hid behind the chest. I held my breath until my lungs burned. He pointed his light everywhere. He didn't see me. He left. He locked it. He didn't even know he locked it. Day 13. I don't know how much longer. It's so cold. I think of the sun. I heard him laugh downstairs. He was on the phone. A business call. A sound from another world. My world is this dust and this darkness. Arthur dropped the notebook as if it were on fire. The words were a knife in his gut. The cold, calculated man who had sealed his house had laughed on a business call while his wife was dying of thirst and despair just a few feet above his head. The sheer scale of his failure, not as a provider, but as a human being, crashed down on him. He had been so obsessed with the what and the how of the mystery he had never once considered the why. He fell to his knees in the dust, the flashlight rolling away its beam pointing at the ceiling like a lonely spotlight. He was in the center of the nest she had made, surrounded by the evidence of her suffering. He still hadn't found her, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that she was close. She was watching him right now. He felt her eyes on him from the shadows. She had seen him discover her world. She had seen him read her words. The next move was his. Arthur remained on his knees for what felt like an eternity, the dust and the silence of the attic pressing down on him. The knowledge of her presence was a palpable thing, a static charge in the air. She was here, watching, waiting. He was the intruder in her desperate sanctuary. His first instinct, the old Arthur instinct, was to solve the problem. Find her, bring her downstairs, call a doctor. A logical sequence of events. But the man who had read that notebook knew that logic was the weapon that had created this nightmare. This required something else. Something he had long ago buried: vulnerability. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the dusty air scraping his raw throat. He did not get up. He did not shine his light into the dark corners where she was surely hiding. Instead, he began to speak to the oppressive darkness, his voice low and broken. "Jen." He started, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to look for you. I won't hunt you in your own home. You can stay hidden. But I need to say this, and I need you to hear it." He paused, gathering the words that felt so foreign on his tongue. "When you disappeared, my first thought wasn't for your safety. It was for my security, my control. You became a problem to be managed, a loose end. I called my lawyer before I even considered calling your friends. I changed the locks. God, the locks." He choked on the word, the sound of his own shame echoing in the vast space. "I locked you in here. I know that now. I didn't mean to, but that doesn't matter. It's what I did. I was so arrogant, so certain you had just run off from the man who buys you everything you could ever want. I never once stopped to think about what I wasn't giving you." He shifted on his knees, the movement loud in the stillness. He looked down at his hands, the hands that built an empire but couldn't hold a marriage together. "I remember when we first met," he continued, his voice softer now, lost in memory. "At that ridiculous gallery opening, you were arguing with the artist about his use of color theory. You were so alive, so passionate. You didn't care that I was Arthur Pembroke. You just saw a guy in a boring suit who didn't understand art. You made me feel real, not like a brand or a name on a building. And then I tried to make you fit into my world. I put you in this house, this mausoleum. I thought giving you the studio was enough, a designated space for your hobby, as I so cruelly called it. I turned you into an asset, a beautiful object to be displayed at galas. The bird in the cage," he murmured, finally understanding the painting downstairs. "You were painting your own portrait, weren't you? And I was too blind to see it." He looked towards the makeshift bed, the pathetic collection of cloths. "These last 2 weeks, while you were up here fighting to survive on drops of water, I was downstairs being angry at you. I was angry that you had disrupted my perfect orderly life. I was the victim in my own head. The narcissism of it. It's breathtaking." He fell silent. He had laid his soul bare to the shadows. He had offered no excuses, only a full and complete confession of his failings. Now the silence that answered was different. It was charged, waiting. For a full minute, nothing happened. Arthur began to fear he had been wrong, that she had somehow slipped away, or that she was too weak to respond, or worse, that she had heard him and had judged him unworthy of an answer. Then from the deepest, darkest corner of the attic, behind a stack of old shipping crates, came a sound. A faint rustling scrape. Arthur held his breath. He didn't move a muscle. Slowly, a figure emerged from the blackness. It was a silhouette at first, frail and unsteady. As she stepped into the periphery of the flashlight's beam, his heart broke. It was Genevieve, but a version of her he had never seen. She was gaunt, her face pale and smudged with dirt, her clothes hanging off her skeletal frame. Her vibrant green eyes, usually so full of life, were huge in her thin face, sunken and filled with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a lifetime of unshed tears. She leaned against a wooden beam for support, her legs trembling. They stared at each other across the dusty expanse, the millionaire and the prisoner, the jailer and his wife. "I didn't plan this," she whispered, her voice a dry, raspy thing unused for days. "I came up here, that night, to get my mother's box. I was going to leave Arthur. I was really going to go." She took a shaky step forward. "I heard you come home. I was going to wait for you to go to bed and then slip out. But then, the next day, the noise, the men, the locks. You were so quick, so cold. You didn't even seem sad, just annoyed. And I realized leaving wasn't enough. You wouldn't have understood why. You would have just moved on, patched the vulnerability." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old fire in her eyes. "So I stayed. I wanted to see. I wanted to watch the great Arthur Pembroke when he thought no one was looking. I wanted to know if you would ever miss me, or just the idea of me." "I missed you," he said, the truth of it hitting him with the force of a physical impact. "I was just too proud and too stupid to admit it." She took another step, her eyes fixed on the bottle of water he had set on the floor. Her thirst was a visible thing, a primal need. Arthur pushed it gently across the dusty floorboards toward her. She stumbled forward, fell to her knees, and grabbed the bottle with trembling hands. She twisted the cap with difficulty and brought it to her lips, drinking deeply, water spilling down her chin and onto her dirty shirt. The sound was raw, elemental. After a long moment, she lowered the bottle, gasping for air. She looked at him, her eyes clearer now, the immediate fog of dehydration lifting. "What now, Arthur?" she rasped. He had no algorithm for this, no flowchart. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea what the next step was. And for the first time, that felt right. "First," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we get you out of here. We get you help. And then, we talk. For real this time. No strategies. No assets. Just truth." She watched him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. She saw the brokenness there, the shattered pride. She saw the man she had once fallen in love with emerging from the wreckage of the mogul he had become. Slowly she nodded. Arthur rose and walked towards her, his steps hesitant. He knelt in front of her, and with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed, he reached out and brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She flinched at the contact, then ever so slightly leaned into his touch. In the dusty, forgotten attic of their perfect house, surrounded by the ghosts of their failed marriage, a fragile, terrifying new beginning was born. The descent from the attic was a slow, surreal affair. Arthur supported Genevieve's frail body, her arm draped over his shoulder, her feet shuffling weakly on the ladder's rungs. Every step down was a step into a new, uncertain reality. The harsh, sterile light of the second-floor hallway seemed to blind them both. He didn't call an ambulance. He knew instinctively that this could not become a public spectacle. This was their private cataclysm. He called his personal physician, Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who owed his discreet practice to the patronage of Silicon Valley's most secretive figures. "Alistair," Arthur said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I need you at my house. Now, no questions. The highest level of discretion is required." While they waited, Arthur led Genevieve to their master suite, a room she hadn't slept in for over 2 weeks. He ran a bath for her, and she didn't protest, sinking into the warm water, with a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. While she bathed, Arthur threw away the untouched salmon and asparagus that the kitchen had prepared for his dinner. He made her toast the simplest of foods, and she ate it slowly like someone learning to taste again. Dr. Finch arrived and was a paragon of professional calm. He assessed Genevieve with gentle hands, his face betraying nothing: dehydration, malnutrition, extreme exhaustion, and shock. He administered an IV drip, his movements efficient. He asked no questions about the circumstances, treating it as he would any other medical emergency. But his eyes, when they briefly met Arthur's, held a deep, unspoken gravity. For the next few days, the house became a convalescent ward. Genevieve slept mostly, a deep, profound sleep that was both healing and an escape. Arthur watched over her, canceling every meeting, ignoring every demand from his empire. He sat in a chair by her bed, not working, not reading, just watching her breathe. In her sleep, her face lost its haunted look, and he could see glimpses of the woman he had married. When she was awake, they spoke. Not about the attic, not yet. They spoke of small things: the weather, a book she had wanted to read. He told her about a ridiculous bug in a new piece of software, and for the first time in years she laughed, a small, weak sound that was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Bianca was the first person they told. She arrived, her face a mask of fury and fear, ready to tear Arthur limb from limb. But when she saw Genevieve pale but safe, her anger dissolved into tears. She hugged her friend, rocking her gently. She shot Arthur a look that could have melted steel, but she said nothing, recognizing that the situation was far beyond simple condemnation. The reckoning came a week later. They sat in the garden, the California sun warm on their faces. Genevieve was stronger, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket. "I need to leave this house, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I can't heal in the place that was my prison." Arthur nodded. He had known this was coming. "I know. I've already made some calls. I'm selling it." Genevieve looked at him, surprised. "Selling it? But it's your masterpiece." "It's a failed experiment," he replied, looking at the sharp, unforgiving lines of the glass structure. "It's a monument to control. And control almost killed you. I don't want to live in it anymore." She was going to stay with Bianca. They decided on a trial separation, a word that felt both clinical and terrifyingly real. There were no discussions of lawyers or assets this time. Just space, time. Their last conversation before she left took place in her studio. The painting of the bird in the digital cage was still on the easel. "Why didn't you scream?" He asked the question that had tormented him. "When you heard me up there, why didn't you just make a sound?" She looked at him, her eyes full of a sad wisdom. "Because I wasn't sure which version of you would find me, Arthur. The man I married, or the man who changes the locks. I had to wait and see who would come looking, the jailer or the husband." He had no response to that. It was the unvarnished, brutal truth. Genevieve left that afternoon. The silence that descended on the house was different this time. It wasn't the heavy, accusatory silence of her absence, but a lighter, more contemplative quiet. It was the silence of a blank page. Over the next few months, Arthur dismantled his old life with the same efficiency he had used to build it. He sold the house. He stepped down as CEO of his company, taking on a less demanding role as a board chairman. He sold the sports cars and the automated gadgets. He and Genevieve started therapy both individually and together. The sessions were brutal, excavating years of misunderstandings, resentments, and the slow creeping loneliness that had defined their marriage. He learned about the suffocating weight of his expectations. She learned to give voice to her needs before they became a desperate, silent protest. Their future was an unwritten design. There was no guarantee they would get back together. The damage was deep, the trauma real. But for the first time they were building something together, not with steel and glass, but with fragile, honest words. One day, Arthur visited Genevieve at Bianca's apartment. He brought no flowers, no expensive gifts. He brought a single, simple sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. "I thought Maybe you'd want to design something new," he said, holding it out to her. She took it, her fingers brushing his. She smiled a real, genuine smile. Not the one for the galas, but the one he remembered from the gallery all those years ago. "Maybe," she said, "but this time we design it together." The path forward was uncertain, but it was no longer dark, and it was a path they would walk for the first time side by side. The story of Arthur and Genevieve Pembroke is more than just a mystery of a vanishing wife. It's a chilling exploration of what can happen when communication dies and we become strangers in our own homes. Their multi-million-dollar fortress became a symbol of emotional isolation, proving that the most secure walls can't protect a relationship from the secrets hiding within. It's a stark reminder that what we don't say can be far more damaging than any argument, and that sometimes the person we've lost is living right above our heads waiting to be heard. What would you have done in Arthur's position? What would you have done if you were Genevieve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of love, obsession, and the dark truths of a marriage captivated you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who appreciates a real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the secrets we keep.